morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'd like to talk to you about the social classes in the 19th century, mostly in the Victorian period, but generally throughout the 19th century. It's going to be based on a chapter from Sally Mitchell's Daily Life in Victorian England. I uploaded the book on Moodle, so if you want to read more, if you want to know more, get more details on this subject, there is a chapter on that. And if you know anything about the 19th century, and especially the Victorian period, the British society at this point was very class conscious, and the concept of social class started to influence almost everything in the society. The reason for this is that there were significant changes in the British society after the Industrial Revolution, and especially they became consolidated after the French Revolution and the social unrest in Britain resulting from that and the war with France. The society was changing from the traditional way of life, traditional divisions, to what we can understand as the modern system. So in the old system, in the system before all those revolutions of the 18th century, there were basically two social classes. The aristocracy, the peers, and everybody else, the commoners. And if you look at the division of the British Parliament, it's still, I would say, mentally in this period. There are two houses of Parliament representing two social classes of the British society. The peers, the lords, the titled aristocracy, and the commoners, meaning everybody else, those who do not have aristocratic titles. Of course, in the modern society, starting from the French Revolution, we are more used to thinking about a three-class society with the working class, the middle class, and the upper class. And this is the system that started working in the 19th century in practice, despite the outdated theory. So if we talk about the reality of social classes in the Victorian period especially, we can easily talk about three classes, with the new class, the middle class, really becoming the dominant force in Victorian society. We'll talk about the ways in which the Victorian middle class dominated the society in a little moment, but let's now look at those three social classes briefly. It's a kind of pyramid system with, of course, the working class being the most numerous, and whatever you read and watch and think about the 19th century being the century of the middle class, it doesn't mean that the middle class was the most numerous of the groups. It was the group that recorded the greatest increase during Victoria's reign, from around 15% of the society at the point of Victoria's accession in 1837 to more or less 25% of the society at the point of her death in 1901, but it was never more than that, never more than 1/4 of the entire society. And the aristocracy was even less, it was less than 5%. And even if we take the broadest definition, so all the landowners, all the people who owned land and lived by collecting rent from the tenants, so not only the titled aristocrats, and there were around 650 aristocratic titles in operation in the 19th century. So there would be, at most, because sometimes one family held a few titles, but at most around 600 families that could be called aristocracy. Then we have the gentry, the smaller landowners who did not have aristocratic titles, but nevertheless they did not have to work for their upkeep. So with that, it would always be more than 75% or around 75, sometimes more percent of the society that would constitute the working class. So they were the most numerous group in Victorian society, but they were not politically active. Many of these people were just struggling to survive. They were living on the verge of destitution. Only around 15 of the working class were skilled workers who might be seen as artisans, as professional craftsmen doing all kinds of skilled work. The rest were unskilled workers with more or less another 15% on the verge of extreme poverty. So these would be the people who would need state assistance, who might end up in workhouses. So definitely they were, I would say, too hungry to think about politics. So that's what we have, and I hope you can see something. This is like a general graph of the class division of the British society in the 19th century. So the working class, the middle class, and the upper class. And of course it's not correct, because the part for the middle class seems the largest, not because it was the largest, but because I think it was the most important. And as you can see, there is an internal division into the lower middle class, middle class, and upper middle class. And this is how the Victorian society operated, and there were those informal divisions making themselves, because they were so needed. The middle class that only started to emerge in the late 18th century. Before, there wasn't even a term middle class. In most of the 18th century, before the revolution, if somebody wanted to write or talk about the middle class, they usually used the term the middling sort. The middling sort. So the city dwellers, the professionals, so those between the poverty of the workers, especially agricultural workers, and the luxury of the aristocracy. So that's the introduction, and we'll talk about the classes in a moment.